Welcome to the ThinkSpace podcast with myself, John Staskowski, and Danny Massaro. Our goal with this podcast is a simple one. We discuss and dissect a prescient topic, issue, or theme that we think is interesting and might help us humans better understand why we think, feel, and do what we do. If you'd like to engage in these types of conversations too, you can check out thinkspace.academy for a unique cohort-based course that will help you think critically and live authentically. Hope you enjoy the episode. Well, just to give Martin Heidegger a little bit of context, he was a German philosopher, lived from 1889 to 1976, best known for his contributions to the field of phenomenology and existentialism, really. And I'm sure, like most people who you speak to who read philosophy or study philosophy, they tend to agree that he's one of the most important and one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. The main focus that we're going to have in the episode today is Heidegger's concept of Dasein. And that was a concept that he introduced in his main text, really, or his fundamental text called Being in Time, which was published in 1927. What Dasein is, according to Heidegger, he basically introduced it as a term for the type of being that humans possess. And it translates literally in German as being there. Now, Heidegger was a bit of a funny cat, really, because he tended to invent a lot of his own words because he wanted to conceptualize stuff that hadn't really previously been conceptualized. So a lot of the words that he uses, he came up with, Dasein being one of them. But it translates roughly as being there or being in the world. And that's what we're going to dig in today and why we think that's just an important way to maybe reflect on your own experiences and look at the world around you. We think it's a really useful concept. It's probably just as a little, not a warning, but a lot of Heidegger's work can be interpreted quite differently. So Danny and I are going to give some of our interpretations of it. Danny especially having studied it, as you're going to hear, on his PhD. But we're just giving you a bit of an interpretation, hopefully switching you on to something, getting you interested in it and thinking, actually, yeah, that's something I might want to go and read about myself or listen to more or find out more about in your own time. We'll hopefully just switch you on to that and give you some insights that way. So, Danny, like I just mentioned, you used Heidegger quite a lot in your PhD, and he's certainly a name, I think, that's probably come up in most of the episodes we've done, I think, so far. We've definitely referred to him and quoted him, perhaps given examples from his particular view around phenomenology. So I don't know if that's maybe a best point to start from, is just you give us your insight into why he became such an important figure for you when doing your recent PhD work, and we'll take it from there.
My title of my study was an ontology of being and how one might live well through a sporting life. Heidegger was famous for basically studying being, and he wasn't about what is, he didn't ask what is human being. He asked, what is it like to be a human being that cares about everything going on? And he sort of came up with loads of different terms. And I got to Sartre, which we talked about in the episode on Bad Faith. But Sartre had gone over to Germany, met Husserl, who was the first famous phenomenologist, and Heidegger was his student. Heidegger fell out with Husserl because he started to have a pop at his concept of what he called this version of phenomenology he did. And he said basically he turned it back into a thing, a process, which apparently phenomenology isn't supposed to be, because phenomenology is the study of actual lived experience. It tends to want to stop the subject-object view of the world. So more of the Descartes, Cartesian way of thinking about the world, that we, in some ways, it's just a world of objects, and human is just another object. Obviously, that's very rational, scientific, and so on. But Heidegger said, no, there's been a forgetfulness of being. Human beings aren't objects. They are temporal processes because they know that they live through time, unlike objects do. Then he uses like trees, rocks, So, and even animals, he said animals don't know that. They're in instinct loops. He says we impress intelligence onto them, but most animals are just in instinct loops. But humans know, first and foremost, that they are temporal beings. We'll talk about it later. He said we are beings towards death. We know we're the only ones that know we're going to die as well, and that can play on our minds. Sartre found all this fascinating, went more with sort of Heidegger's views, and you can see a lot of Sartre's stuff that he sort of took from Heidegger, elements of that in his work. Heidegger was also really influenced by Nietzsche, so there's a bit of a strand there. Maybe we'll do an episode on Nietzsche and some bits of his, and we can see. So all these philosophers, they were taking bits, the best bits, the things they liked off each other, and rejecting other parts, and like debating philosophy, because at the end of the day it's just concepts. But Heidegger's therefore came up with this concept called Dasein, and instead of saying human being, he wanted a new word, like you say, to make people not have any connotations with the old word. So he called human beings Daseins, and he said that a Dasein is a being there. You as ultimately as a human, you just find yourself thrown into the world. You're just here. Your first primordial first sense is kind of like, I'm here. And he said, if you forget that bit, that is a sort of terrible flaw in your thinking about existence. So he said at the start of all existence and everything is this sort of feeling you have that you just find yourself kind of here in the world, and you're just there. You're not like living on the sidelines of the world as if you're detached and looking in, which is more of an ethic ontology where you sort of look from the outside into the fishbowl. You are constantly like the fish in the fishbowl, swimming around, looking, almost looking out at the world. And he criticized lots of philosophy for doing it the other way and saying, you've totally negated and wiped out the fact that humans are first and foremost thrown in. They didn't ask to be put here. They didn't choose the parents. They just find themselves in a particular place, in a particular time in history, in a particular situation, living on a certain street, in a certain culture, blah, blah, on and on and on, which we'll talk about in a bit, that thrownness. And you've just got to get on with it. So that's how I was. And I found that like linked to athletes. I've seen a lot of sports science that have come up with like ethic approaches to what sport is, and we see it on all the commentary, and they talk about the football matches and what's going on from the outside. That's very popular on telly now, obviously, and sports science. But Heidegger would criticize that because he said, no, you're not the person playing in the football match. You're the person outside watching it and telling everybody what's going on. But you're not actually, if it was Cristiano Ronaldo, you're not Cristiano Ronaldo being Cristiano Ronaldo playing that game. You're outside talking about him. What do really, you're just making it all up. The real truth of what's going on, only Cristiano Ronaldo can feel in terms of that. Does that make any sense? It's tough stuff.
Well, even the words, so the word phenomenology, I think any ology starts sounding a bit, oh, here we go, this is going to be like, people tend to think, what does that mean? But it's quite a simple thing, really, phenomenology. It's just, I have in mind, it's just bringing being to light.
Yeah.
That's what phenomenology is. So people like Heidegger, essentially what they're saying is, look, you are not a thing in the world. You are not a rock, a tree, a box of matches, whatever it is, you are not a thing in the world. Basically what they were saying is, look, you've got to try and understand yourself, not as beings, but in terms of being.
Yeah.
So not as beings in terms of object, but what it is to actually be. And that's basically all phenomenology is like. So therefore, you're not an object. Let's do some phenomenology to try and just dig into that a little bit and kind of work out what that is to be.
You're a being here process that's always sort of just here taking part all the time, and it's obviously very Eastern as well. It's very spiritual. You people listening might have heard about being and be and just be and sit there and just be and feel connected to the world and and all that, or be part of it all, that flow. Heidegger again, he'd read a lot of the stuff from the East. He was massively influenced by it, and obviously pre-Socratic philosophers who hadn't started overthinking in terms of what he said. He said it was much more simple when we just accepted that we were just sort of here getting on with stuff rather than trying to separate everything out and objectify it.
And that then links back to what's really a key theme for us, isn't it, in all these episodes, is Heidegger was big on authenticity. So to just stay in that state of just, just going along with things, for him, that was inauthentic, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was what he called it, fallenness. This was another thing. So he said that what you do, you try and forget your being and get yourself stuck into projects a lot and do what they, another thing he said, Dasein, the society you're in, tell you to do. Have a life where you basically sort of just do what you're told to do by modern conventions, get lost in that. And he said it's very understandable that. He wasn't saying that humans were stupid or anything. He said that's partly because you're frightened of dying. It's because you're trying to block out the thoughts of your being here and your fragility of being in the world. So you just like bury yourself into things to so you don't have to think. A little bit like what Frankl has looked at, when he's talked about the Sunday neurosis, where especially when you had a bit too much time to sort of sit about, people really didn't like it. Started to think a lot about why they're here and so on, and how long they have left and what they've done with their lives. And oh my God, I can't be doing this. I need to either go purchasing, spending some money, or get stuck back into a project. Or find something to do. So it wasn't criticising humans. It wasn't saying, oh, Dasein is stupid because it falls into projects. Saying it's but don't overdo it. It's important to not fall into things so much. And that led him to actually say it's actually useful to remember that you've only got so much time and time's passing by. And what are you doing with that time? And is it quality, or are you just doing projects that you've just fallen into? So that side of it was a little bit like what Sartre nicked off him into his sort of bad faith part. But, that's when I see sports people, in my field, like just go into autopilot. They don't want to think about the fact their career might be ending soon. It's like, no, and they do say athletes kind of die two deaths in some ways because the career, finishes and then so on. And that's been a thing that's been a bit of a phenomenon for athletes who are so fallen in a way in the gold medal dreams, in the sports, in what they do. Maybe this happens in other careers, in the army and things. You're so into it, that's all you are. You've fallen in so far. It's very difficult then for that to come to an end. But Heidegger was actually saying you should embrace the fact that that's going to happen. In one of his own little bits of advice ever, he recommended people go and visit graveyards, which sounds a depressing thing. But it's a little bit like the Tony Robbins thing, what he does, where he takes people down in the morgue when they've got problems. He sort of shows them what dead bodies look like and how lifeless it is, and they spend a bit of time down there. Apparently, by the time they come back up through the lift and back into the world, into their lives, they're like, oh my God, this is a beautiful, unbelievable world. What am I doing getting down about things? Go for it. And I know a few people, when I've talked to, who've had near-death experiences and some things like that, sometimes you feel really reborn. And in a way, Heidegger was trying to say that, it's like, keep remembering the fact that you are through time.
And that really was, you mentioned it before about animals that tend to be just in instinct loops, don't they? Where everything's just, they're not thinking really through time. It's just in the moment, your instinctual responses, and maybe simplifying that a little bit, but that tends to be what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas that is the key component of being a Dasein. It is, we know our fate. We know pretty early on in our being that we are going to die at some point. Whereas I think it was Schopenhauer who said the first that an animal hears of death is when it dies, basically.
Right.
It just doesn't have that concept of it until that point where, I don't know, you're wandering through a forest one day and then another animal comes and grabs hold of you, and it's like, oh God, it's not really thinking about it other than that. It doesn't exist as a concept. That's really the core component of being a Dasein, that self-consciousness that we are going to die at some point. And I think that's maybe why this is a useful episode to focus on for people, because we all know what that feels like. Usually people, maybe if they are a little bit stuck in that way of just doing tasks and keeping their mind off stuff, tend to maybe experience that with a little bit of dread and, anxiety inducing, isn't it? You get angst of, oh God, I don't want to start thinking about.
Well, I remember listening to Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual teacher, one time, and he was saying you're often in that state where you're in a state of lack. And Heidegger said that that we're forward thinking. We're temporal beings. We look to the future, and that's lining up with a lot of modern neuroscience with that prediction machine. With the brain's evolved to be a prediction machine. It's evolved to be like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What do I need to know? What do I need to eat? How's my body feeling? What's coming up? So a lot of the new theories on what the brain does is it's just literally a prediction machine to survive, and it doesn't care about being correct. It just wants to survive first and foremost. So it's scanning all the time. Now, Heidegger was saying that. He said you just forward thinking all the time. However, there's this weird thing. It's a blessing and a curse. It helps you, but you also, because you want the future, because you want to be better in the future and get rid of this feeling that you lack things. I want to get that job. I want to get married. I want my kids to grow up. I want that you kind of at the same time existentially know that means you're heading to time out. It's like a weird thing. So if you wish your life away and then it's gone. People often say, where did the time go? What happened? It's gone so fast. I can't believe it. It's going quickly. Make sure the advice, I've had even with having Leo and stuff, it's been make sure you notice every moment. It goes quick. Like there's a bit of regret there. So we're not just future thinking, we think back as well. And this was another thing he started to talk about. And he talked about how you can authentically think about time and how future time is better thought of as sort of moments of anticipation rather than just waiting for something to happen. So so there's very interesting things. It actually gets to a practical level. Realize, we know the times, but use your relationship with the future as constant moments of anticipation. Like try not to be regretful and look at your past if you can as inspiration, like pulling from the past. And he particularly said, do that through your legacy. Do that through your family line. Do that through where you come from. Even the human race. Try and authentically pull quality things from your past into your future and keep that going. And he said that's a lot more authentic way than looking back in regret or coulda, woulda, shoulda, or this, how the past wasn't right and you're trying to make up for it. So it's not that he was trying to give any sort of stupid life advice like now, the like self-help life stuff. He wasn't saying just do this formula and you'll all be okay. He was literally just trying to say it's tough and complex being here in the world. And I find that really useful because I just think like the times where I like come in with my logical head as a coach or as a friend or something, or as a therapist or whatever, a teacher with a student, it's really easy for me to just think of them as if like no empathy. Like, you idiot, you should have done this. This has happened to you. That's probably your fault. And da-da-da-da-da. A bit like the bad faith side. But what Heidegger kind of does, I think, with his concept of thrownness and his concept that being here in the world's just tough. When I look at people now, I don't look at them as objects as much. I just look at them as like, if I think of them more as Dasein, I have more empathy. I think they've been thrown into the world. The parents didn't have a clue, in a way, what they were doing. Their parents didn't. They don't know what's going on. There's so many factors that, yes, they could have controlled things and made things better, and things are at their cause. But in many ways, they don't know what they're doing. They're literally just trying to survive with just being here. And that side of it, that empathy for them, I think that's a very useful thing that it gets you to see people rather than just annoying objects that are always in your way.
That's a point. Some of our reflections and notes that we do when we're just thinking about the podcast before we record, that's something that I noted down, or a question that I asked, not to ask us, but just myself more than anything. But exactly what you just said. Are we fundamentally sick because we've stopped seeing ourselves as beings in the world among other beings in the world? So we do. I think a lot of, because we're looking, that view we have, we're kind of very egocentric all the time, aren't we, as human beings? Just because, if you go back to Descartes and I think therefore I am and all that stuff, that is your perspective. You're always you looking out on the world. So I think there is maybe a natural tendency to see ourselves as we're almost like us and we're subjects, but everyone else is an object. And maybe that's what Heidegger's getting at. We're saying, well, actually, as soon as you start seeing yourself as that and you stop seeing the other people as other beings, then you're kind of going to get into the, you're going to lack empathy and stuff like like that. And then maybe that's why, I don't know, in a capitalist society and that type of stuff, it just goes haywire, doesn't it? Because everyone just sees everyone else as an object to...
Yeah, well, a lot of these philosophers, like even Nietzsche, predicted it a bit more, and even in his times, late 1800s, and then Heidegger, 20th century, going through the big part of the 20th century, they saw the rise of technology, and we know the century of the self, basically, and how important you are and your products and everything you own, and there's obviously been a lot done on that. That might be an episode again, when everything's ultimately about yourself and me in the world and so on, and you see yourself as a commodity in a way. You recognize yourself a lot through your car. You recognize yourself through your job title. You recognize yourself through what you've achieved or where you've been, and or think you're a failure because you haven't got certain things. You're forgetting your being all the time, and it's only when you might get really ill and nearly die, you might think, oh, forget all that. I'm just happy to breathe. What have I been doing with my life? I've been obsessed going to that building over there, trying to be the boss of that place and climb that little bit of career ladder so I could get a speedboat and a bigger house and a bigger mortgage and more kids and more of it. And fine. I got a bit lost in it. I actually forgot. I'm just here being. And I think what we did the other week was great because we did the bad faith stuff, which is all about, almost ambition and make yourself better and do things for the right reasons and so on. We delivered this on the course, didn't we? Like the thrownness element, almost as a point of you were thrown into the world, have empathy for yourself. And we got people to dig out some of their old photographs from when they were like a baby and when they were maybe 1 years old or 2 years old, and looking back at the time they were actually put in and the opportunities and even the technology that was around, and in a way like how lucky they were to even be thrown in, although some philosophers say you're unlucky. It's the worst thing that can ever happen. That's another kind of kettle of fish. But you were lucky to be thrown in. You had parents that cared in some ways. You had good opportunities. You had a good time. That was your lot. Haven't you done well just to survive and make it this far? Why are you always this ambitious sort of creature where you're always trying to be perfect and this and that? Just have a little bit more empathy for yourself.
And that you mentioned technology. Heidegger was a big critic of technology, wasn't he? He was very much, he saw us as the way that we almost view nature as something to be exploited, and we use technology to exploit nature, and it's it's there for us to use, kind of thing. But when you just mentioned there the example from the course as well, one thing I find interesting is how that notion of being a Dasein and experiencing what it is, experiencing our own being, it makes a distinction between, imagine if you were sort of pre-science, pre-philosophy, you're a caveman basically. Your experience of what it is to be a Dasein would have been totally different than ours, say, so you and I, because of technology. He was essentially saying that you would have had to have asked really quite ontological questions about what's going on, what's the purpose of this, and you wouldn't have been able to get an answer. So you might have just been walking along one night and you see a comet flying through the sky. Us, we just Google that straight away. Well, what's that? And it's a totally different experience of being because of technology. And he was like, that was a different ball game back then. That was like proper. This is what it is to be a being. You were engaging with the world on a much more fundamental level than we maybe are now, even though we've got all these tools and technology.
Yeah, and you could go into the Amazon rainforest, into people, wouldn't you? They're living in a certain way, and you spend 3 years with them, and you start to get a feeling of how they exist. But if they came and lived in our society, it's not they're better than us, or they're more natural, and we're ruined because of technology. I think Heidegger was just saying how technology has been so powerful. It's been helpful, in some ways. It's been a nightmare because it treats the world like it's just but in some ways it's protected us, it's helped us, it's made a lot of joy, so it's not all down on humans and the technology, and almost technology's out, it's almost a force out of control anyway. It's just humans, Dasein just makes technology. It just always has, it always will. So again, it's just one of them thrownness things. But yeah, you go out for a meal now. I was out in just at a cafe 2 days ago. I think there were 5 people taking pictures of the food when it got delivered. Now, that didn't happen when I was born. That was only the 1980s. No one was whacking out a camera, photographing the food so they could tell all their mates how amazing their life is, because they've because they're eating a crumpet that's got strawberries on a certain angle with a blob of ice cream and a firework coming out of it. I don't know. That's not to say these people are so stupid. Heidegger would say, "Well, you've fallen there into into a modern thing."
He did see it as a sickness, though. He did see technology as a sickness because he thought it was quite literally robbing us. So that moment you're talking about, there's someone just experiencing eating that crumpet and being a Dasein in that moment. Technology has essentially robbed them of that moment because they're now looking at it through a screen and they're then going to post it on. They're not really experiencing eating the crumpet. It's a very different thing, isn't it?
If you were being a phenomenologist, let's say, you wouldn't presume that. You would ask the person and say, "Did you still taste the thing properly?" "Yeah, I did." "Did it bring extra joy that you took a photograph?" "Oh yeah, I do it for my private collection. I've been looking forward to it for 3 days. I wouldn't have come here even in the first place if I wasn't looking for something I could photograph." And you know what I mean? It's like you could say the same of people who painted mountains. It's like you've sat there for 3 hours painting that mountain. Why don't you just go and walk in it? And we'd look at that now as being quite a peaceful, or a fisherman, wouldn't we? Oh, you go fishing on your own in nature and you go, "Oh yeah, what a Dasein way to live." But you could be like, why? You're just focused on what fish you're going to catch. You're not even here. In phenomenological terms, you would have to go to the individual and dig out what their actual lived experience of that was. So I was just making a point about thrownness. That would not have happened in my time because the technology wasn't there. I'd have had to ramp out a big camera and probably a tripod. And also, not just the technology, it wasn't the done thing.
Can you remember that, though? I can remember my mum and dad putting a sheet on the wall, like a bed sheet, and they'd have I don't even know what they were called, the cameras where it was like you'd load the film in and, we'd be sat in the front, like, looking at a sheet. Imagine that now and it's not like we're talking that long ago, really, in grand terms. But imagine if you did that with a 15-year-old now, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" They wouldn't have a comprehension.
Well, it's like, the TV, microwaves. There's certain bits of technology come along and certain that influence the times you're in so much. Look at the phone. The phone has just changed so much, hasn't it? And like Peterson says a lot, Jordan Peterson, which is be careful when you invent a technology because you don't know really what its other uses. You say it's going to just do this, but it does all these 20 other things, changes. And that again was what Heidegger was saying. The phenomenology of something is its ramifications and where it ends up, what it ends up doing and meaning are way beyond what you've originally invented something for. So yeah, it's all interesting, isn't it? But the thrownness thing, I think, you talk about language and you talk about like comedians, and we talked, didn't we, about Only Fools and Horses and comedy shows and why things have been successful. You had a character in Only Fools and Horses like Del Boy who was obviously thrown into the 60s or early 60s or late 50s as a kid. He had the whole show's about his dad and how it was, where he come from, and lives in Peckham, and it was all about him trying to become a millionaire this time next year. So it was a very 80s type thing of you are what you are and you've got to get better. But what we liked about that story was that maybe he wasn't ashamed of his thrownness either. He sort of was dead comfortable still being a ducker and diver, but still had ambitions. And he generally looked like he could have a good time. I know he was a comedy character. That's perhaps why he was like, that kind of character's loved, because we could all resonate with that. It's like we all want better things and we all want to be like, he became a yuppie, didn't he? Caricaturely, it was like he couldn't wait to be like this new yuppie. Everyone around him were like, "What are you doing?" But he could still nip down the pub and and be like common in, where we were from, and muck about and duck and dive, even though he wanted to. And I think in a way that's quite heartwarming, because I think if you can treat yourself a little bit more lightly, yeah, I want to do that and I'd love that and that'd be good. And if I won the lottery, I'd do this. But the moment that you get too stuck in that and forget that where you're from, you forget your innocence, your thrownness, the fact that you're even lucky to probably even be here. all the people that put you where you are. You think you're so clever and all of that. Well, if you hadn't have gone to school, or you hadn't been given an opportunity to do this, or your granddad hadn't have read to you, and all these tiny little things where people invested in you, you wouldn't have been such a perfect person. So just remember where you come from and all these people that have put you there and how proud they would be of you, but be proud of yourself as well. So it's this, I like it. It's this back and forth of, yes, Sartre, take responsibility. Don't fall too much, like what Heidegger's saying. Don't just blandly, oh, well, what can I do? It's just the time I'm in, and just go with it. Feel that anxiety you sometimes get by, I'm going to die, I don't want to, or I want to become better, I want better things. Yeah, fine, that's your Dasein projecting forward. But equally, use your past, realize where you've come from, chill out a bit. You're doing really well. Don't be embarrassed and ashamed of things too much. Forgive that younger self. Understand that person who was there, that kid, or where you were put in, was doing its best. That Dasein at that time was doing its best in the world, mucking about. And in a really weird way, you're still a kid, mucking about, bungling along, trying to survive. You'd stop taking yourself so self-seriously. And I think that's a kind of perhaps what the Eastern people say about getting rid of your ego, isn't it? Maybe that dropping of that seriousness. So that all this stuff that you hear a lot of modern sayings and stuff, and Heidegger was kind of there first with what he'd observed about being here in the world.
To give it a little, not structure, but just to give people a little bit of a framework to think about, because I think what you're referring to there, really, where you're talking about considering your thrownness and not being ashamed of it, or try to run from it or hide from it, that's getting into that existentiality a little bit. So what that is, Heidegger had what's called his care structure, or you'll see it commonly termed as his care structure. And it's like a central focus of this stuff, really. And basically, it doesn't mean care about in terms of you care for your family or you care for your son or your daughter or your pet. It just means stuff that you're interested in and care about more generally. So it's a thing just in your reality, really.
Yeah, we always want things to go our way. Every little thing, we're bothered about what's happening.
But it's like when you mentioned tasks and stuff, just the stuff that interests us and we're engaged in and that type of thing. We just care about it, don't we? And part of his care structure was, so we've talked about thrownness, or you'll see it termed facticity. So that's basically the reality that you are just chucked into. You have no choice in the matter whatsoever in terms of what period that you're born into in the world. Was it as a caveman like we've talked about, or is it like a 15-year-old now on Instagram in the 2000s? You don't have any choice in your history, your culture, your class, your gender. You're just thrown into that. So that's your facticity or your thrownness. And then next, a lot or underneath that is what's called fallenness. So Danny's referred to that a couple of times, and that's basically what other Daseins around you are doing. So what are they up to? The people that are in your immediate surroundings and society, family, friends, etc. And Heidegger said we tend to just fall into line with that, or we fall into that. So whatever the tasks that other people are doing, whatever their behaviours are, whatever choices they're making, we're basically seeing what other Daseins are doing, and we're maybe not copying, but we're heavily influenced by what that is. So
that was what he called. Sorry, John. Yeah, that was, just to clarify, that was that Das Man, the they. I brought that in on my PhD in sport because when you're a person in a like a certain scene, you're a DJ in the rave scene, you're an academic in the academic scene, you're a squash player in the squash scene. They are prominent in your mind all the time. What are they thinking of me? Even on your street. What are the neighbours thinking? What are my peers thinking? If I go to a school reunion, there's an instant they of, these are they're almost observing me constantly. They're thinking about me. And I almost have to play that game where they accept me. And again, he wasn't saying that's bad. We're just saying that's part of being a Dasein. You are a social creature as much as you're an individual creature. And Das Man, the current they who are around you, are having an effect. Now, I know that when I worked out with Laura, my wife, and the tour, she used to distract her a lot. That I'd get bogged down. We called it like the travelling circus. And once we could start piercing through that and breaking that down and not caring as much about the they and the gossip and the who said this and this, then that actually took a lot of pressure off and gave her a lot more freedom. So in a way, the fallenness or the bad faith into that had dropped away.
But no, but it is. It's interesting because essentially a lot of people, I think, do. They're basically taking the cues for how should I behave in the world from what other people are doing. So again, Heidegger, like we've talked about with technology, one of the things he said was if you're living in a really consumer-driven society, you're basically given a load of predetermined tasks that you just need to do as a member of that society. So, go to school, do this, do that exam, then get a job, and then you've got to do this and then aim for that. You've not really chosen those tasks. It's just that's what, again, they're there, or the society's given you as predetermined tasks.
Yeah, if you do something a bit out of the ordinary, they will let you know about it.
Yeah.
What are you doing? How come you've left that job? Are you stupid? Well, why have you took your kids out of school and doing that? Why did you go there on holiday? Well, should you not have invested in your future? Have you not got any life insurance? And, why have you not got a new car? You're minted. But I can't believe you live in this house, with your success. You could live in this house with, they let you know.
Well, he saw it as that, people just living life, consuming stuff for the sake of consuming it, essentially, because that's what they're told.
Yeah, but they do it in a good way as well. I've been a bit negative there. They do it in a, you're brilliant. Well, PhD, well done. You've won that. Well done. You're doing really well. They'd let you know. So again, Dasein, it gets its cues, yeah, in a negative and a positive way from they, and we live like that.
But yeah, so that's your facticity or your thrownness and then fallenness. Now, what Heidegger was saying was if you just stay at that level and you don't really consider or unpick, well, what is my thrownness and how has it influenced me and what impact did that have? Or you don't really consider your fallenness, so what they are doing and whether that's good for you or not and whether you should do that or not. That's what he saw as being inauthentic. So in this care structure, he then brings in what he calls existentiality. And that's where, again, it's a core thing of being a Dasein, really. Like we said, you're not a rock, you're not a tree, you're not an object. A key factor of being a Dasein is you have possibilities. So we have choices. That is what it is to be a Dasein in a lot of ways. It's the fact that you do have possibility and choice. So what he was saying was, that nature of the possibilities, that gives you existentiality. So you should be considering, well, what is my thrownness? What is my fallenness? And maybe then you don't need to do what they tell you to do. Maybe there are things that you can't just use an excuse and say, oh, well, it's not my fault that I was thrown into this. I didn't choose this. Heidegger was like, no, you still have a choice. And that's where he really brought the authenticity in, where he was like, to be highly authentic is to really get into that existentiality. What are the possibilities that you've got and take a hold of it and kind of forge your own path, really. That's how I see it. Anyway, I don't know if you see that slightly differently as those three levels, Danny.
I see it exactly like that. And that was the part that Sartre really nicked and nailed on. The anxiety of always having that choice. And we know with our Frankel episode, he talked even about attitude. No matter how bad your situation, you've still got a choice of attitude, which he talked about in the death camps and things. And some choices are harder than others, obviously, and dilemmas. But again, Heidegger wasn't putting value judgments on people. He was just saying, that's the problem of being here. That's Dasein's blessing and curse. Who can blame people for trying to escape that constant choice and constant, I can do something about this. Because often there's times you just can't, because we looked at things like absurdity comes in. The world sometimes acts on you. You don't always act on the world. And I think that's why I like Heidegger. He's not giving any direct guidance. He just keeps opening it up to say, this is the complexity of being here. And it's damned quite tricky being alive and being a Dasein. And I find that a lot of modern books and or a lot of interpretations of old philosophy, which are now like modern books, they say like, no, just do gratitude and you'll all the complexity and go. Just ask the universe what or just join this religion and the complexity will go. And he was saying that can help if it helps, if it might, whatever. But again, if you go too far thinking you just can escape the Dasein, and all sorts, you're forgiven. I see something like Ronnie O'Sullivan in snooker, the best snooker player who's ever played snooker, and he's constantly saying how chaotic and messy he is in his head and the game, and he likes the game, he hates the game, he's a good player, he's a bad player. He finds this game sometimes easy, sometimes he's terrible, and he's always acknowledging that complexity. And the interviewers often can't understand him. They just need him to say, "No, I am Ronnie O'Sullivan, I am brilliant, and I am in a good mood, and I will win." They don't want it. People don't want to hear chaos and complex stories. They want neat packaged narratives that make sense.
We've seen that this week with the penalty shootouts, haven't we? So those, there was a couple of threads on Twitter where, Liverpool won the FA Cup, and it was like 12 tweet thread on this is why they won, and it broke it down. It's because Klopp did this, but they didn't do that. This was the thing. And it was really like, basically, this is why they won the penalty shootout and Chelsea didn't. And it really took it down to that. It ignored the complexity.
That's the forgetfulness of being. That's forgetfulness that it weren't machines taking the penalties. It was people in a random situation. But yeah, scientists, too much rationality. And the thing with science is like, science isn't bad, science is amazing, but first and foremost, science was invented by Dasein. That's again what Heidegger was saying. Even if you study the sun, the temperature, the distance, the size, how long it'll last, it was still came from an interested, I wonder what that might be if we measured it. The Dasein's first, the being here thing was the first thing to invent the science. So again, you can get all rational and I spent a lot of time trying to help parents in sports and wrote a book on it and tried, and didn't really have any solutions in it. Just try this might work and so on. So quite relativistic, which is what I'm like anyway. And I try and embrace ambiguities, and again, my PhD was like trying to say like it was a complex, messy lived life that was always oscillating and emerging and unfolding in strange ways, which I now understand. That's what a lot more. When I was reading Heidegger, I was just going, this guy is answering all the things that I've been feeling, where I've been in university doing these sort of models of resilience and growth mindset and winning models, and they've just made it so rational that I believed it and I tried it, and sometimes it kind of helped, maybe by chance, maybe just because it focused me. So I'm not criticizing it as complete crap, but it were way too simplistic. And that's what, if you that's the thing where if you think everything's simplistic, you end up beating yourself up, because you end up thinking, I should have done this, I should have eaten more food, I should have done this instead of that. And yeah, elements of that, but not all of it. You can't, especially when it comes to even like things like sport as well. I mean, how chaotic can sport be? So Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir as well, who was very interesting, more about ethics and morality and her ethics of ambiguity, and how she felt a lot about, a lot of people fall into roles, caricatures to deny ambiguity. So that's another interesting kind of thing as well.
Well, I don't know if you know the classic, it's almost like a meme now, isn't it? But the blue pill, red pill choice on the Matrix. And I suppose it's quite relevant to a lot of different concepts in philosophy. Like usually it's like Plato's cave, isn't it? As, take the red pill and walk outside the cave, or and just stay chained up in the cave and watching the forms on the wall.
Yeah.
I see Heidegger's care structure a little bit like that.
Right.
Where he's giving you that existentiality. So considering your facticity and your fallenness, that for me is a little bit like that. Are you going to take the red pill?
Yeah.
Where he talks about being deeply engaged in asking questions.
Yeah.
And examining your facticity and trying to understand your facticity. He talks a lot about being introspective. So realizing the tasks that you've fallen into rather than the tasks that you've actively chosen to do and pursue, or whatever it might be. And that really resonates to me. It's a bit like, are you going to take the red pill and go, no, I'm going to be reflective and think a bit more critically about the tasks and the pursuits that I'm pursuing? Because is it genuine? Is it authentic? Or is it, well, I've just fallen into this because because that was my thrownness, and now I've just fallen into this, what society is dictating I should do. That's a bit like the blue pill, isn't it? Just keeping your head down and going on with it.
He called it in his book Being and Time, which is impossible to read. So you just read all the interpretations as best you can, get as close to it in your own understanding as you can. So I'm by absolutely no means an expert on Heidegger. I know the base bones of it, but you only need to know a few things sometimes, and it can wake you up. And that's the thing. He's just saying things. You see, the trouble with Dasein is Dasein's nature is so natural and familiar that you miss it. So, but he said, but you only need a little glimmer of understanding sometimes to know what you already know. You know, sometimes you know things, but you don't know them factually. Do you know what I mean? You get a sense, you know something, and it's like a hunch or a gut feeling. And so when you talk about Dasein, people know that feeling of just being here, although they would never have thought about it before, because no one ever talks about it. It sounds crazy. So it's quite hard to actually get it because it's so familiar, it's so natural. But one of the things that he said as well, that I liked at the end, he said he had this concept of anticipatory resoluteness. That was basically what I was saying earlier. It's an authentic way of considering your unfolding nature into the future, that you're going to get old. You know that things are on the horizon. You know you're going to get bits of bad luck and so on. It's probably like Noah's Ark thing, isn't it? Build an ark because you know what's going to be coming. The flood will be on its way eventually, or someone will come and do things, or you will get ill, you will deteriorate. So all the time, every day, try to take part and make small, tiny little decisions and choices, and in anticipation of the resoluteness that you're going to require. So you're going to be if you're a Jack Nicklaus saying to who was it? Or Paul McGinley? It was actually the Irish golfer. He said, "Any advice for me, Jack?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You're going to lose 99% of your golf time. So get used to losing, pal." It was like, I thought, yeah, and oh, great, what a great piece of advice. Why? Well, he was saying, you think you can just, you're gonna be disappointed in yourself all the time. So anticipate that and how you're going to handle it. Whereas if we're not careful in life, we don't do the anticipatory resoluteness. We go around like victim. Oh, this has happened. Oh, this has happened. Oh, I can't believe that's happened. So Heidegger said authentic. He said you can live that way and let things come and wash and just be a hedonism, and you might live fast, die young type thing and take your chances. You might be the 100-year-old smoker. Or you might be the person that thinks, no, probability, if I keep smoking, I'm probably going to die of lung cancer in my 60s, 70s. Before a lot of this stuff we take for granted now about being reflective and being critical thinking, maybe, obviously it was saying that Dasein can help itself in its existence by having this concept of anticipatory resoluteness. And we all know that feeling, you know what I mean? We know we shouldn't really go out for the third night on the trot. Shouldn't really open another gambling account. I shouldn't really have another ice cream. I had one, okay, I'll have one at the weekend. Let's have a clean week. We all make these tiny little part decisions based on trying to work out what could be right or wrong. And equally, people could go, I'm never drinking again. And that's because it's the devil. And it's like, well, actually, that could be the worst thing, because you could miss out on some amazing social occasions, and you could be a misery, and you could take yourself too seriously. I try to summarize that simply in my PhD, for athletes living a sporting life. Like, you can't escape the need to constantly take part every day in what your unfolding is. The moment you try and deny that, and someone just tell me what to do, or you just want to follow a creed or a maxim or a religion or a cult or the latest thing, you're probably going to get a bit unstuck. You've switched off from trying to make tricky situations into potentially better situations. Even if that sometimes means going on a 3-week holiday, go and have the holiday, but choose to do it. You don't wait to burn out,
I wonder where you think this comes in then, because another distinction he made, and it reminded me of it when we just mentioned the penalty shootouts there and being overly rational and overly scientific. He makes the distinction between thinking and calculating, which again appealed to me, where for Heidegger, he said, well, real thinking is thinking about being, whereas most people, the thinking that they're doing is actually calculating, which again goes back to the, that notion of everything's technical and rationalistic and scientific, and we're too far over that end. So again, even in life choices, I think we're maybe a little bit like that as well, aren't we? Where, you know, when you're thinking into the future, like you're talking about there, we're probably just calculating stuff rather than truly thinking about our being. And I find that distinction really quite interesting. And again, he takes it back to, you know, the impact of technology on that and stuff, where everything's, you know, monitored now with stats and numbers and facts and figures, and you're forgetting about, you don't really know how you feel anymore because you're relying on an app to tell you, well, you've had this much sleep and you've ate that many calories, and it's all calculating rather than thinking about being.
I couldn't agree more. And I remember reading a bit of a text. I didn't get through the whole book, like I don't do with a lot of books. I don't know why. Sometimes I just don't finish them. And
because you're on audiobooks, you need to read properly.
yeah, this one was like I was giving it, and sometimes just too hard to read. They're overwhelming at the time, and then I go back to them and I find them really easy. It's weird, but it was called The Ravenous Brain. And it was probably about 8 years ago, and it was about basically the brain's just wants, and that's like calculative. Just it learns to want info. Sometimes when I've been out drinking, say I've had like, you know, got not, I don't say a bad hangover where you're just battered. Just say 4, 5, 6 beers, 8, 9, 10. Uh, your day after or for 2 days, it takes the edge off. I feel a little bit like, oh, and it's actually like reminds me of like chilling out a bit, and I'm not as there's a different kind of thinking. I'm just more being, and maybe that's what people feel when they go on holidays, and they're not caught up in their everydayness. What was another Heidegger phrase? This everydayness that sweeps you along in your everyday life. I mean, that's so hard to break because you've got appointments. You know, we're almost like appointment machines, aren't we now? We get there, we got them, we've got to see our friends, and we've got a podcast to do, then we've got a lecture, then we've got that on Friday, and you run your life by appointments. And that's the everydayness that we now exist in a way. You know, that's a practical kind of useful thing in many ways to survive in the world. You know, keep a roof over your head and keep your contacts and keep you in order and your habits going, like, you know, for what we do and all sorts of things. But when I've relaxed and I've had a few beers, or I just can just chill or go walking a bit more, I am very fully aware of a less calculative thinking, and I'm a bit more like being just a bit more chilled and relaxed. And that's an area for me I have to keep trying to work with, because I'm obviously, like we are, me and you, quite intense, aren't we, on the calculations and the thoughts. So you never pass this. You know, it's not like we're talking about this, so therefore we do everything that you're supposed to do. We're as, like you might say, we're sick. You know, if you might say you've fallen or sick, you know, because you're Dasein. You're Dasein, I'm Dasein. But do I feel bad about it if I do it? Do I beat myself up? Not really. Overall, I think I tend to do okay, you know, compared to when I look at some people and I see they're a bit lost in the direction and their heads and so on. Definitely do too much.
Well, what you've just said there reminds me of two people. Ray Pete, for one, who's, you know, of people, he's a bit of
Yeah,
a madhead, isn't he? He's a bit of a kind of
yeah,
out there biologist, and I'd call him a philosopher, but he's someone I've taken a lot from in recent years. And he talks about how he has full
yeah.
days where he won't read anything and he won't speak to anyone, and he basically gets away from that verbal side of his brain where everything's about verbalization, and he just gets away from it, and he just goes and paints, or he listens to music,
Yeah,
or, you know, and just gets out of that
yeah,
verbal element of just constant thinking and rationalizing about stuff.
yeah,
And the other person who's kind of a mate of both of ours, John Kiley. So remember, or one of his things really is a
yeah,
really prominent strength and conditioning coach and
mm,
lecturer. And I know you and Laura worked with him, didn't you? But you know, when you talked about when you've got a hangover, I think what you're tapping into there is, because we all do it. You've
mm,
been out and you're feeling
mm,
rough, you're tuning back into how you actually feel. So you go, well, I won't do that because I
mm,
was out late last night, so I'll maybe have an earlier night tonight, or I won't do this because. So you kind of tune back into your being. And John Kiley was always big on that, you know, with because he's working with high level athletes like he did with Laura. He'd often just say to them, "How are you feeling? What's been going on?" They maybe had a bust up with the
yeah,
boyfriend, or, you know, they've maybe had a particularly hard session, and he's very keen to move away from, well, it doesn't matter what the
absolutely.
plan says, because a lot of people now, it's like, well, this is what my training plan says I'm doing tonight. It's this, but you're maybe feeling like you're all
Yeah,
over the place
yeah,
emotionally. he would be like, no, well, we won't do that then. We'll do something else, or we'll miss a day, have a day off. That's like what Heidegger's saying. That's thinking about being, isn't it? Rather than, well, the rational scientific training plan that we've drawn up for this Olympic cycle says this. So this is what we're doing, regardless of you as a Dasein.
Well, John's work, which is well known, isn't it now? Brilliant work on basically debunking training models and periodization, right? And bringing in stress. What I tried to do with mine was very similar to John in a sort of different ballpark. It was like, let's get real. Let's stop being like calculators. Let's get real again. We're people. We're Dasein in the world. Things are changing all the time. Moods, like, but that's it. It's John's. That's why he's so good. Mark Campbell's like that. We train Laura as well. We're now ahead of EIS and all that stuff there, helping people. And I just try and be like that with players. I have players in the World Championships this week, and it's not really gone that well for a lot of them. And it's like, you don't just jump onto the blame game and look at it like it's calculative. You come in with some suggestions and say, do you think it could be this, or could you do that? But sometimes you leave it because you know that there's big background issues going on, or the opponent were just unbelievable for some reason, or whatever. You get a sense, and I think that's it. The way of saying it is you sense make around people more than you calculate around people. Yeah, that's perhaps a good way of saying it. But it's hard to put that on academic courses, isn't it? And things, because it's like, you can't teach any personal. You might only be able to sense make with your daughter or your wife, but you can't sense mate with anybody else. So it's like, well, what can I do with that in my career? That's no good. I'm not going to value that. What I'm going to value is an approach where I can make sense of everybody, everywhere who's ever lived, regardless of the culture. We'll just call that context, but we'll bypass that. We won't actually get into it. We'll just say, yeah, it's context dependent. It's like, no, no, you can't just sidestep that. And again, that Heidegger would have been madly critical of that. You can't just throw in, yeah, well, it's context dependent, or it depends. Well, that is the actual main part. You can't just, you can't caveat it with that. Like, your whole thing falls to pieces. It points to something useful, and it's useful what you've said, but admit how partial it is, please, because you're talking about this is applying to people. You're not building aeroplanes. Well, if you're building an aeroplane, I want a full-on scientist, obviously, yeah? But when you're talking about people and life and how to live, which is what we kind of do on this podcast, Heidegger was pointing and saying things that was really interesting. Not correct and totally fine, just interesting stuff.
And it's like we said, often we're interpreting others' interpretations of Heidegger's work, aren't we? So we're not saying, this is not a lecture.
Oh no, we actually could be way off.
Yeah, exactly. These are our interpretations, and it's for people listening to maybe use them as they will. And maybe that's a useful way to conclude this episode then. So to take it back to authenticity, I think that care structure is maybe a useful thing for people to consider. So what's your facticity? What have you been thrown into? And just unpicking that a little bit, really, about the influences that's had and how, and not in a negative way either, just seeing some of the positives as well that your thrownness gave you to make you the person you are today. Consider your fallenness. So what are the tasks that you're working on? Why are you working on them? Is it because it's truly your authentic path that you want to follow, or have you maybe fallen in with the people around you a little bit too much? And clearly the way that you can do that is by appreciating your existentiality, the possibility that you have, the choices that you have at your disposal as a Dasein. And that is then when Heidegger says that is being authentic. It's not going, I think he did refer to radical authenticity at one point, but it's not really a dichotomy. It's not either or. You're not inauthentic or authentic.
Oh, no.
It's a bit of a path, isn't it? So one thing that we've done with the people on the course in the last week, the analogy that we started talking about was, imagine you're driving up the M6. So the bottom of the M6, I think, does it start at Rugby or somewhere like that? Start off, and then I think we established there's 18 service stations on the M6 as you're driving north. So the analogy we use is, the further you go up, and if we consider that's then, we associate that with the more authentic you are. So the higher up the M6 you get, the more authentic you are. What we were saying was, clearly at the service stations en route, there's fewer people at each one, because the more authentic you are, there's going to be less less people who are that authentic. So,
Right.
and the choice we kind of said was like, how far up the M6 are you going to get? Because if you get to the top end, so like Gretna, I think might be the last one, you're basically the only person there. Because that level of real radical authenticity, there's no one else there. So it could be quite a lonely place. So there has to almost be, it's like, what's your red line? Like, what's authentic enough, but you don't want to go too far that then you just alienate yourself from the
Yes.
rest of.
You have to play life's game. You have to join.
Yeah, there's some things as part of your fallenness and your thrownness and all that that you've just got to, you can't.
Absolutely, forgive yourself. Yeah, it's made some bad choices. Go with things. That's the way life goes. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so that might be a useful thing for people to ponder on. How far up the M6 do you want to get? What's a comfortable level for you where you feel, yeah, I feel I am I'm considering my existentiality. I'm not just a victim to my thrownness, and I'm just mindlessly falling in with what's around me. You're considering that, but you then don't want to set fire to the whole thing and go, right, well, I'm going to not do anything that anyone else is doing, and you just become this kind of lone ranger type person. So that's maybe a useful thing to just consider for people. Examine and understand your thrownness and your fallenness, and then just decide, are there maybe little things that, maybe falling in a bit too much with that, I shouldn't be.
Yeah, and you can always back out. Never too late. You can always go, God, I've been like a hardcore proponent of that. I'm going to look a right idiot now to everybody if I pretend I'm not a vegetarian anymore. But I really want to eat meat again. Don't worry. Like, it doesn't mean you're an inauthentic prat and no one's ever going to like you again. Just, you've always got a choice. You can always just go, well, I've changed my mind and I know that's just, I'm different now. Something's happened. Last one for me, the last final bit would be just that, what we said earlier. Dig out some old photographs of when you were really young, preferably with your parents or whoever was around, obviously providing it wasn't, the worst time ever and stuff, but just have a look at some of the photographs or a little movie and look where you came from and remember that thrownness that you didn't have a choice in, and therefore don't beat yourself up about every little thing that's happened to you and your fate and everything. A lot of it was the world acting on you. It wasn't you acting on the world as much as we think we're all in control now, and that still goes on. And that might lead to the absurdity, the absurdity episode we did, didn't it?
It's fair to say as well, everyone who's done that, not exercise, but they've dug out some photos and stuff, every single one of them said they really enjoyed it. And it gives you provided you didn't have a really traumatic childhood, and we're not dismissing that stuff at all, but for most people, I think it gives you that warm feeling of you looking back at probably people who aren't even here, like grandparents, great grandparents, different family members, and just little things that you see and remember. It gives you a warm little buzz, doesn't it? And you go, actually, yeah, that's what it was like back then. That's where I'm from, and these are my people. And I think it's a good exercise to do, to just spark a little bit of
absolutely great
bit of reflection.
stuff.